Welcome back to the 10-Minute Workshop. In this first video of 2020, I'm finally getting around to changing the top on my Festool MFT. That's coming up next. So yes, finally, been talking about doing this MFT top for such a long time, finally getting around to doing it. I figured if I don't do it now, then I probably never will. I bought this MFT about 10 years ago, bought it secondhand, and it's had a fairly rough life. Hasn't been carted around at all. It's been sort of sat in here for 10 years. But before then, the guy used it sort of in and out of his van. He managed to cut completely through the aluminium all the way through the top, which is quite an achievement because the top does sit up above the aluminium frame a bit. But anyway, it's about time it needed changing. Sometimes you can take them off and just kind of flip them over if they're not too far gone, but this is far too far gone. So I'm going to replace the top on this. One thing I do with it is, when I got it, I changed the cut line because this was just a real mess and he'd filled it all afterwards. I put a little sacrificial strip, a strip of, I actually used 9mm in there, and that was just replaceable. You could just sort of take that off and it was just held in with double-sided tape. What I found though was that because I'd moved the cut line over, when I wanted to do a bevel cut, the cut came and encroached on this line of holes. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to move the cut line over on the new top, so it's between two rows of holes. I'm going to use a wider 50mm sacrificial strip, just of 6mm. I used 9mm before because that's what I had to hand, but I don't tend to have 9mm these days, whereas I have an awful lot of 6mm. So I'm going to route that groove in there, get this sacrificial strip settled in, and get the new top in. Because I've moved that over, I'm going to have to move the rail over and re-square it, and because the fence has got to come off, I'm going to have to re-square that as well. So it's a bit of a general bit of tidying up and maintenance on the MFT, and of course it does mean that the MFT will have to come out, so we get to see what's lurking underneath there, and it's been there for the last 10 years probably. But that's what we're going to do now. I've marked the position of the shallow groove, and with the router zeroed against the surface and locked down, I've set the depth of cut using the inset strip against the depth gauge. And I'm routing the groove in 3 passes, shifting the router over each time. Then, checking the strip is a nice friction fit, I can move the new top out of the way and start clearing up around the old MFT. With everything out of the way, I can take off the fence and fence clamps, and then struggle manfully with the rail assembly. So, lots and lots of sawdust caked in here, so we're going to get that out in order for or at least free it up, in order for this to slide along comfortably. This whole assembly is the same as the one on the other side, on the front side, but it fixes the rail in place and hinges. With a bit of perseverance and brute force, I coaxed the rail assembly off the framework. Oh, yeah, that was harder than it should have been. Let's bring that down. And that's the front. Yeah, okay. Might need to let the dust settle a bit once I've cleared this. God. I'm sifting through this rubbish fairly carefully to make sure I don't miss anything important and throw it away. I wondered where they were. Then it's just a question of cleaning up. So I've got to admit, microphone. I've got to admit, this is not in as bad shape as I thought it would be underneath. Actually, it's not bad at all. I'd expected there to be more cracking where the thing was. So if it hadn't been so old and if the holes weren't so sort of loosey-goosey, you probably could have used it for something. As it is, because it's not in great shape in terms of the condition of the holes, it's not really going to be useful for anything. Maybe as a portable bench where you're not really using it for something, and maybe there's a thought. But the top itself is just held on with a screw in each corner. It's really simple to undo. Torx screws, of course. Thank you, Festool, for that. Off it comes. That could have been made for it. Now I'm going to get in actually. What we'll do, lift them up a little bit. As before, the top is held on with just 4 screws. Okay, so new top is in, no dramas, no crises, all good. Because we're moving the rail position, because we're moving it over a little bit to move off this sort of cut line, there are little stops for the rail carriers to bear against, so you can actually take this off and put them back on again easily. I almost never do that, but these little stops are going to have to move across a little bit, and because it's just awkward to get to, I'm going to have to do this while it's here roughly, and then fine tune it, really square it up when it's down and in situ. So we've got to fit the rail and the rail carrier at the rear. And the fence holders at the rear as well, the rear clips. And then we can worry about squaring those up after that, but we'll get them fitted first, then get it dropped down into position, then we set about squaring it up. With the MFT in place, I'm using packers to bring the surface level with the benches either side. Then I can start squaring up the fence. I'm using a couple of scraps of plywood, both the same thickness, as a gauge between a couple of bench dogs in the top row of holes and the fence. Pulling the fence tightly against the ply before locking it down. Job done. Alright, so we've got our fence squared to the row of holes. We're going to get the rail squared to a column of holes. We're going to use the nearest column to the back edge of the rail and pop a couple of bench dogs in there. We need a little scrap of wood, about 18mm thick. Doesn't really matter as long as it's thick enough to touch the back edge of the rail. Mine's a scrap of MDF, surprisingly. And this is cut, more or less within a couple of millimetres to the back edge of this rail. It's not in exactly the right place yet. It's a little bit loose in there, but it is cut accurately enough to be parallel between the two sides. Mine's parallel to within a couple of hundredths of a millimetre, so close enough for me. And it's that accuracy that you'll need to ensure that your bench is square. But that's in there now. All we've got to do is, I'm just going to tap with a lump hammer this whole assembly across a little bit. Still a little way to go. And that's snug. And then we can do the same thing with the front assembly. Just snug that up to the rail and lock that down. Then we can take the stop, snug that up to the front support bracket, and then that whole thing can be taken away if it needs to be, and it can come back in, and it comes back in exactly the same place. We'll do the same thing with the rear support bracket. It's a bit tight in there, you're not going to be able to see anything, so I'll do that without you. But that's basically it, and with that in place, and it's the work of literally a couple of minutes to knock together a very quick jig to make sure that that assembly comes back in every time you move the rail. So there we go. That's pretty much that for this little project. A nice, easy project to ease our way into the new year. I've been meaning to do this for such a long time, and I'm really pleased that I've gotten around to doing it. And also gives me a chance to show how I go about squaring up my rail and fence. Mine is the older style MFT 1080, and I much prefer the fence arrangement on this to the newer MFT 3s. It's a much simpler way of working, to my mind. So these do come up occasionally second-hand, so keep your eyes peeled. See if you can pick one of those up if you're in the market for something like this. Failing that, you can always make your own, of course. Yes, that will be a video at some point. Just to mention in passing, obviously you don't need to make a full jig. You've got your little strip of whatever carefully cut to fit between the bench dogs and the back of the rail. You could just keep that carefully. I started doing that and I ended up using it for other things, so whenever I do one of these, I do actually make up just a simple little jig like this. It takes 2 seconds, and you're much less likely to use that as the rail or style for a shaker style panel door, for example. I want to give a shout out to Tim at the Hardwood Offcut Shop. Tim very kindly gave me this MFT top, or made this one for me. He doesn't make them as a sort of commercial venture. He does them when he's got a bit of downtime on his big CNC machine. So give Tim a call at Hardwood Offcuts Shop. Links are down in the video description below, and see if he's got any in stock. And if he hasn't, well, go over there anyway, because it's a fabulous, fabulous place. Well worth a visit if you're within striking distance of Brentwood in Essex. I just want to give a quick shout out to everybody who's watched any of my videos over the last 3 years. I've been on YouTube 3 years, finished 3 years around about Christmas time, and on New Year's Day I hit my 50,000 subscriber mark. So thank you everybody who, if you've ever watched one of my videos, thank you very much indeed. If you are one of the 50,000 people who have subscribed to me, I still struggle to say that, to get that around my head. 50,000 subscribers is quite incredible. And of course, if you're not a subscriber, then do consider subscribing by clicking the subscribe button down in the box down there below. But I'll just say thank you very much. Happy New Year. Look forward to seeing you next time. And I'm going to run the credits for my Patreon supporters. Patreon supporters always get a credit at the end of the video, just to say thank you very much for being a Patreon supporter. And you can join the Patreon party at patreon.com/10minute workshop. If you do, love to see you there. If not, well, I'll see you next week anyway. Take care.